So good. Bang, 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 knocking at your door. Bang, 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 trying to start a war. And this weekend, seen it all before. Only to the one. If you see them coming, tell me.
Baby, how are you? I'm so excited. I am so stoked for today's session because it's all around communication, which is literally what I studied in school, but it helps to set ourselves free when we can understand how to communicate boundaries, how to set them with ourselves, how to set them with others, and really view it through this lens. I've literally been skipping around all day, well, all morning, I guess, about this because last session was all around just really getting to the foundations and understanding like the difference between walls and boundaries and how to really open ourselves up to creating boundaries from a space of abundance instead of lack. Because that's what I see one too many people doing is like, we burned our hand or we burned our heart one too many times, and therefore we built up these walls of protection instead, and then feeling lonely and then wondering why these energies are being matched in a certain way and wondering why our relationships aren't having the depth that they have, or family issues arise or friendship issues, or like that resentment starts to build up. And resentment is the number one killer of relationships, whether it's romantic, whether it's family, whether it's friendships, whether it's in business, whether it's with your freaking phone. Like any type of resentment is what takes the pleasure and the joy and the delight and that feminine energy that is so strong and it's so potent. It takes that away. And so I wanted to start with that because it's what sets us free and welcomes us home. And it's been a cornerstone of my life to really understand boundaries, coming out of hard relationships or coming out of family things and blended families and friendships and cheating and lying and all the kind of things. Really setting boundaries and being able to communicate them effectively has been revolutionary. So, Kia, I'm so happy you're here, baby. And so today we're going to be going deeper into that. Kia, I know this is, I think, the first time that you've been here live. So just invitation, the chat box is your best friend. As always, go in there, flirt with someone, send them a cute little DM, do whatever. Let your questions be known and heard. Hi, baby. Let your questions be known and heard. You have me for the next 57 minutes. I will probably go over because we know self-projector likes to talk, but utilize the space, ask your questions, honest reflections. If you don't feel comfortable sharing whatever, you can do the private DMs and I will like low-key slide it into the conversations, but really let yourself be seen in this space because it's beautiful. And so to recap of yesterday, it's so hard, y'all, to do this just on my like laptop as opposed to my like big monitor. Noted for next time I travel. So yesterday we talked about the codes of, let's see, it goes all the way up here. These are all my notes, literally 9 pages of notes, y'all. We're definitely going to go over today. We talked about your relaxation and your ability to be comfortable being seen. Really has to do with opening your heart instead of building up walls. We talked around the myths of being worried and, being labeled as dramatic and, boundaries making you selfish, or, the shame around not having boundaries, or all the misconceptions and the myths around it. And we kind of dismantled that. We talked about how we're not at fault for the fact of the walls being put up, but we are responsible for dismantling them to actually cultivate deeper connections and have that type of conversation. And even though it's really fucking uncomfortable, like it is, but it's that short-term discomfort for that long-term game and that long-term relationship that you can start to really balance. So it's like really choosing, can I sit in this discomfort for a little chicken nugget second so I can build the longevity of this relationships, and let my wants, needs, and desires come into the space. And then we talked about, a lot of times in boundaries, there's peanut butter on my laptop. Gross. A lot of times we confuse defense strategies for our boundaries. And that comes from a wounded space. And when we can actually step into a space of, I truly love myself, I know myself, I understand my identity, this is what I value about myself, and this is what I'm going to create my boundaries around so that I can keep that light center focus. It really shifts the energy around well, I got hurt, so this is what I'm going to do. And I'm going to project this onto this now stranger because I got hurt one time, and it's a very different energy. And really at the root of everything we spoke about yesterday and what we're going to go even deeper on today is that lack of boundaries or lack of understanding of boundaries is really just lack of identity. Like the biggest thing that we, let's see, how do I make this? The biggest thing that I see often is that we're really displacing our energy and our
I just finished that.
identity and everything onto other people and external forces and things of that nature. So really, when we have a core, this is who I am, this is what I value, this is the identity in which I hold, it shifts and changes. And one of the big things, before I riff on some other things that came up for me when I was studying yesterday after our call, was just when we don't, or we're creating boundaries around a wounded space often, like from our past self. And so really my invitation for you today is when we're talking about boundaries and we're looking at the stuff and we're looking at our communication styles and we're looking at the relationships that we want to bring this work into, is really looking at the higher version present self. What is the boundary she wants to set, or he wants to set, or they want to set? What is that? Instead of coming from, this is, the ego driven, wounded, lack space, can we present the conversations in I may be triggered, this is going to be uncomfortable, this is going to be new because it's not common yet, we haven't created that pattern yet, but can you enter into the space of, this is the new brilliant, sexy, bold, sensual, sacred version of self, and this is how I want to step into this conversation. So hi, are you guys ready for today? How are we feeling? How was the homework for yesterday around, what are your biggest boundary blocks? We spoke about rejection. We spoke about fear of being the bitch. We spoke about, denying that we even have boundaries. We spoke about a whole bunch of stuff. So I'm curious if anyone wants to, in the chat box, let me know what came up for you, or if you didn't do the homework, right now is the perfect time for what comes up for you when you think of your boundary blocks, because that'll also help with the communication style as well. There we go. My little neck pieces are pissing me off. Being afraid of disappointing others or conflict. Yeah, being conflict avoidant is a big one. I know that was a huge one for me as well. And I shared mine yesterday as well, where it was like honey over vinegar is the concept that my dad raised me on. And so I was always thinking like, oh, if I speak negatively or if I say something bad, therefore it won't be received. So let me just hold this inside, and then a bunch of resentment would come out. And that's when like my anger would happen, or I'd be using drugs and alcohol and all that kind of stuff to really escape. So yeah, Dawn, that's a very common one. And I want to kind of even dive deeper into that today. Being with an anxiously attached partner and trying to balance my boundaries with his wants and needs. Ooh, that's going to be a good one to touch on today as well. Because it is, because when we are in partnership, we have the other person's emotions to care about, right? Like it's the thing with partnership, it's never like one person against another person, right? It's like you as a team unit against the conflict of interest. Not conflict of interest, but conflict. And so it's looking at, okay, so it's as a partner, how can I support my person through this so that they feel secure, so that they feel loved, so that they feel like they can, have the confidence to explore different routes in the relationship. And that does, when it comes from like, my tendency is anxious attachment. And so I can definitely speak to that when we get into communication styles as well, because then we get to shift into secure attachment, and different kind of scenarios will bring things out, but there's different ways of communicating that can. And that's the thing with attachment styles as well, especially when it comes to boundaries, is one person does have to be the secure one, and it's like that choice and that reprogramming. And I know that's something that we've spoken about and that you're working on, so that they can start to then model that behavior instead of us matching it, because sometimes that's the thing that happens, especially when setting boundaries or things of that nature. We mirror what that person is doing. Like we mirror the intensity, we mirror the avoidance, we mirror the games, we mirror the dishonesty or the neglect or whatever the fuck is coming up. Like we mirror that as opposed to modeling what we want. And so it's kind of looking at those kind of things, because I see, I did that. I will catch myself in spaces being like, well, they didn't text me back or they didn't, so I'm going to do this, when inside I'm like being eaten alive because my anxiety is like, we don't communicate this way. This is horrible. And then really snapping out of that and realizing like, oh, if I deeply want something that is secure and is connected and very communicative, then we're going to have to integrate this in a space and doing the hard thing and doing the uncomfortable thing instead of, and it's more vulnerable, right? Like it's more vulnerable when you put yourself out there, you start to put boundaries around people that do have anxious attachment, because how do we make it not about them? So I will definitely dive into that today. And so today I wanted to put all of this stuff on because let me know if you can relate to this. But I remember when I first started getting into like the relationship space, and it's so funny because I was actually just looking at like some old videos and stuff from like last year before I even got into this space, and just like looking at the stories and the narratives and things of that nature. And what I grew up in is chaos. Like our family was very passive aggressive. I grew up like I didn't believe my parents were in love. Like as an empath, you can kind of like tell things like that, which is so funny because my brother's only 14 months older than me. And we have such a different perception on how our parents' marriage was. But it's very like conflict avoidant, like slamming doors until like the resentment builds and like no one's talking about things, and very much projected onto like, this is the way that you're going to be, this is the way that we perceive you to be, this is whatever. And then all of a sudden like doors are slammed and parents are fighting behind closed doors, or like my dad, he traveled a lot for work, and so he was just never around because he wanted to avoid conflict. And just there was a lot of like built up tension in our house that was never spoken about. And so that's how I entered relationships. Like it was this don't rock the boat, people please. I didn't know how to I didn't even know what my needs were, right? Like I quickly became enmeshed with everyone I ever dated. Like I got into NASCAR because my boyfriends weren't like, if you know me, I am not a NASCAR kind of gal. Like I got into NASCAR and I'd get into sports and I'd get into these things. And it was very much like, it got to a point in my life where I was like, who the fuck even am I? Like outside of all of these things, what's my identity? And how do I and I shared this story in, I think it was Unattached, where it was like, I didn't know what love was, but I knew the way that I was doing it wasn't right, because I was in a domestically violent relationship. He was literally known as Tinder King. Like he would cheat on me every week. And it was fine. And all these kind of things would be happening. And I knew my style of engagement with others was not right. So after leaving that relationship, after leaving domestic violence, and like getting my bum off the ground and getting into, Al-Anon and CODA and the support groups and doing the 12 steps and doing all the kind of things. And I did the healing phase, but then it was like, how do I love? Like, how am I ever going to love again? And there was a lot of tripping and falling, and I definitely didn't do it right the first times, but it got to a point where I started to put myself in the arenas, and this is why I love groups and mentorship and activating things and podcasts and books and things like that, because I started to hear these stories. I started to hear these stories about these women that were in relationships where it wasn't like their partner was their only person on this planet and that was it and but it was like they had their partner and they had a supportive partner and they had banging sex drives and they, had healthy ways of navigating conflict, and they spoke about that very openly, and they had really deep friendships, and they had healed these family wounds with their parents. And I remember sitting, this is like my first big investment with mentorship, and I remember sitting there being like irritated at first, because I was like, that's not how my relationships are. That's not like, I don't trust my friends really. Like they're like close, they're acquaintances, but I really wouldn't fully divulge my heart to them. I didn't trust like half the mentors previously to this that I was working with. I was like, they're trying to gimmick me something, and they're like, I didn't trust anything. their families, like they were super close. And I was like, my family's not like that. Like I haven't spoken to my family, and like I was living in Asia at the time. Like I wasn't close, you know? And it irritated me at first. And then I started to look at these scenarios and I was like, but, and I started to listen more, not just learn, right? And this is kind of what I was talking about yesterday when I was like, come into the space and like receive what I'm saying. You can always go back and revisit it, but like receive what I'm saying to you right now. And I sat there and I was actually receiving it, and I witnessed heard them for the first time, even though it was concepts I had heard dozens of times before. It's like I heard them for the first time and I realized, if they can do it, so can I. Right? Like if they can do it, so can I. And that's when I started to dive into these different dynamics and understanding these, nervous systems, and understanding these, hello, Kathleen, new ways of communicating styles, and really diving into this, because where you're at right now, whatever it is that had you jump into this series and this masterclass and understand boundaries and have conversations and be like, whatever it is, you're not stuck there, right? Our family is a choice. Our relationships are a choice. Our friendships are a choice. Our careers are a choice. The relationship we have with technology, a choice. It's a story that we tell ourselves about that makes it difficult, that makes it broken, that makes it things. And that might piss you the fuck off, because there might be some things in your life that are so tender and alive and real right now. But even then, if you look at through a lens of how can I learn in this? What is this teaching me, and who do I get to become because of it? It will shift everything for you. And so I started to hear these stories, and I was looking at life through this lens and being like, okay, so if they can do it, I can do it. What do I need to know about myself, my identity, my blocks of connection? And then once I have that stabilized, how can I lean in and set boundaries and communications with others? But a lot of the times, especially when first starting out, it was like, I didn't know myself. So I was just trying to puppeteer other people to make me feel comfortable. Can you relate to that? Yes, I agree. I've been there too. I would like to do things I would do things my partner's like, but I didn't like. I lost myself. Yeah. And so I would try and like puppeteer these like situations and not be able to also take other people's boundaries. It was so hard. And that's a foundation I want to kind of talk about as well, where it's like, yes, we can set boundaries. Yes, we can understand these kind of things, but at the same time, we have to be able to set the boundaries with ourselves. And that was a big conflict of interest in myself. It was like, I wanted this type of relationship. I wanted my man to be like this. I wanted my friendships to be like this. I wanted my business to be like this. And yet I was not following my own boundaries. I was not, I wasn't living in that high standard that I wanted the world to match me in. I started to say, this is the type of relationship I want, or this is the type of friendships I desire. This is the type of wealth and business I desire to accumulate and grow over time. If you looked at my life, it was just very reactive and responsive to the situations that were happening around. And I was hoping like something would change, something that I could orchestrate outside of myself would change the internal chaos I was feeling. But really at the core is I was afraid to even speak my needs because I didn't think that they were valued. I was afraid to express myself because I didn't think it would be accepted, because I was for so long, I was too much for basically everyone in my life. But as you evolve and you grow and you start to express your needs and you start to look at your life and your boundaries and your magnetism, the world matches you. Right? Like that's the piece of today that we're going to be diving into, is like your boundaries are your invitation to the world. And so when you start to set these with yourself and you start to have these type of bridges instead of barriers, the world gives you the right people, and you're never going to be too much for the right people. You will always be too much for the wrong people. But if you are in the right places at the right time, and it does take a lot of testing, I'm not going to lie about that. It takes a lot of testing. It takes a lot of confidence. It takes that gray fucking in between area of like reactivating a voice that you maybe haven't used in a while. it takes standing in that until the point that it gets comfortable. And then all of a sudden you're at a new boundary and you're like, this is a new edge and this feels crunchy and oh my God. And instead of that being something that you fear, you sit there and you realize, oh my God, I'm stretching into another limit, like another dimension of your nervous system and your capacity. So it's really looking at these kind of things so that you can set yourself free, welcome yourself in, and really become that type of living sanctuary that I know all of us deeply desire. And so let's talk about conflict avoidance, because that was the first one that I saw. And that comes with being comfortable, going back to the concept of being comfortable with self, because there's a way of communicating. This is what I want to go with this. There's a way of communicating boundaries, wants, needs, desires in a way that does not mean conflict. There's an energy to that. Because if you come in the heat of the moment, when you are triggered and you are activated and you are sitting there and you're like, motherfucker, no, this is not what we do. Like, for example, this is literally what was just happening with a family dynamic. In a family dynamic, there was a boundary that wasn't even clearly spoken that was crossed. And then someone retaliated. And instead of it actually be a boundary, it became this pissing contest. And it did become a conflict, a very big, annoying conflict. But the way that you can do that better is, one, the reason that we have mismatches and boundaries and conflict and communication styles is because they're not directly communicated. Like if you look at the stories within your past and the way that you're talking about things and whatever, we do this like passive aggressive, not being direct thing because we don't want to hurt someone's feelings. It's like, I need you to blank. I need you to call before you come. I need you to have a direct communication with me before you come. Okay, that can easily be done. But if someone is scapegoating around it and they're talking about it to other people and, we're not actually doing it, and we do this thing, we play telephone with people around us instead of directly communicating with that person. We're like, well, this person, they didn't do that. And this is how you know that a boundary was crossed as well. How is the story of which you were telling it to another person? You're like witnessing it, as opposed to having the direct conversation with that one person going, hey, I don't like it. Even that, because I wouldn't even say it that way, but like, hey, I need you to do this. And it can avoid so many conflicts, but because we're so afraid of said conflict, we actually end up putting ourselves into the self-fulfilling prophecy because we avoided having the hard conversation, and then everyone builds up resentment, and then the thing happens that we wanted to avoid the whole fucking time. Is this landing for you? I know this was a big thing for me. I didn't want to sit down with someone and say, hey, this is how I need you to love me, or hey, this is how I need you to communicate with me, or this is how I need you to do your work, or this is how I need you to whatever the thing was that we were working on. Instead of doing that, it was like, how can I sugarcoat this nicely and do this, whatever. And then resentment was building inside. And then all of a sudden, one thing would happen, and I'm talking about something that was happening a year ago. Right. And here's the thing, like with boundaries and communication, like if you're coming to a conversation with someone and it does have to do with a conflict, don't go into an archive from like 2018. Don't do that. Keep it very present. With the most recent 3 times, if you do even want to use things, because if you're setting a boundary, here's another thing. You don't have to actually give context to it. You could just say, I need you to do this, period, end statement. And it doesn't have to go drown on and on and on, but we do this thing, especially as women, where we love to over-explain, and then we miss the whole point of the boundary being set. Because, and I know we talked about this yesterday, it was when we talked about yesterday how like you're the writer of your instruction manual, and if people are pushing you or you're feeling unseen or you're resentful and things like that, it's up to you to rewrite your instruction manual. That's the same thing as if someone is pushing your boundary and you say no and they keep pushing it, or they keep looking for loopholes. That most often means to me that you were over explaining. And it's not to say sometimes we don't, like, you can give reason if you want, that's entirely up to you, and that's something to experiment with. But when we're over explaining, and if something that's commonly coming up when we do set boundaries is the fact that people aren't respecting them and they don't take no for an answer, and they're, I don't know, somehow, and then we're ending up doing the things that we said we weren't going to do, and we're like, how the fuck did I get here? Why am I doing this? Like, it's often because we over explained and they somehow found a loophole. Does that make sense? They somehow found a loophole. And so when we're setting a boundary and we're looking at, okay, I want to avoid conflict. I want to do this in a nice way as possible. I want to make sure that I'm respected in my times. Like, that is entirely up to the instruction manual that you write yourself. And so there's ways of doing that, right? It's looking at, one, am I doing this from a place of, I know my needs, wants, and desires, or am I doing this from a reactive place? Like, that's the first foundation of doing it calmly, right? Because when we're setting boundaries, it's not in the middle of activation. Your hormones take 6 to 36 hours to regulate after a trigger. This is why I always say, like, if you're in an argument with a partner, like, get out for a day, because you will continually sit there and repeat yourself because your hormones are dysregulated. And this pisses people off sometimes, to be honest. Like, if anyone is ever upset with me, which doesn't happen as often anymore, but I will always be like, I will talk to you in 36 hours, like, which makes people mad because you don't want to, when you're talking to people and they're in the midst of the trigger or you're in the midst of the trigger, matching the two triggers, all you're just going to have is the pissing contest dinosaur war. And so it's looking at, okay, if we're both activated right now, is there a way that we can go and actually regulate ourselves? If you're regulated and you do nervous system work, that can happen within 6 hours. But if you're dysregulated and you haven't taken sacred singlehood, it can take up to 36 hours to regulate your nervous system, which is why you come home and then you have the fight, and then it just kind of packs, or someone shuts up and then you get resentful, and all of a sudden you're having the same argument that you were having years ago. And it never really gets resolved. So looking at that, it takes 36, whatever. So taking the space, be like, okay, how can I calm myself down before I go into this conversation? And how can you make it not about you? Boundaries, yes, they're about you, your safety, your activation, your confidence, your comfortability. There's physical, there's emotional, there's a lot. But when we come into a conversation, and especially with someone we love, like with a stranger, boundaries are way fucking easier. It's way easier to set things with a stranger. But when it's family, when it's a best friend, when it's our lover and our partner, when it's a client, those are way more vulnerable. And so the kindest way to enter these conversations is, how can I see this through their lens? How can I see something I see a lot as we're building up these walls without really getting curious as to why the person we love so much is acting in such a way that is igniting us. So one, asking that question, why am I so activated by their behavior right now? Like, what is this? Two is, why is that the response system? I talked about this in The Seductress and all that kind of stuff, but we live in a world where we're scanning for red flags instead of getting curious as to why that person is the way that they are. Because at the end of the day, for you to say that you don't like someone's personality, or you don't like the way that they act, or the way that they do, or the way that all the kind of things, what you're saying is you don't like the way that they've learned how to survive up until this moment, because all of our personalities are built out of survival. Every quirk, every screw, every annoyance, every thing was built out of a survival mechanism. And that's not to say we have to accept everything. We can love people and we can leave them and we can love them from afar. And it's a very beautiful thing that we get to do. Like, it doesn't have to be a conflict, like, fuck you, you're this way, I'm out, or I have to bend over because, you know, you've had this happen to you, so I have to accept this shitty behavior. Like, you don't have to do any of that fucking shit. But before we start to build these walls and put ourselves on pedestals and do these kind of things and create these conflict-driven boundaries, can we start to actually witness this through another person's lens really quick? And if we don't know why that they do something that way, do you have the confidence and the comfortability in yourself to bring yourself to that conversation and be like, hey, you do this thing, like, why do you do that? Just so I can better understand you. And sometimes that won't be met. Sometimes people will get defensive, something, but it's also a different type of conversation most people aren't used to. And they might feel jaded or attacked at first, but again, it's all about the energy and the delivery. I just want to get to know you a little bit better. Why is it that you do this? I had to do this with Sexy Man, right? I just want to get to know you a little bit better. Why do you suck at your phone? Because this is driving me nuts. Like, why is this the thing? We had a fucking banging ass conversation for like 7 hours. It helps to get to know the other person. And then from there, you can start to build these boundaries and have these conversations. I have to do this with my family all the time. With a blended family, with the way our family was built, with the way my relationship is with my stepmother and things of that nature, you can see the clear shift in our family dynamic. One is my early 20s, when I had not done any of this work yet. I had no idea. And I thought the world was out to get me. I was in very much victim mode and angry and fuck all this, mad about the new marriage, mad about my dad's new family, mad about not being included, mad that I'm basically an orphan now, like so mad. And I took it out on them. Not even that, I took it out on just avoiding that family. And then when we were together, like I put myself on a pedestal, like you guys don't know me, this whole thing. And not that my stepmom is my favorite person, but instead of getting curious as to why are you the way that you are, I made her wrong, which did not build the relationship, right? And in that, I had to sit down with myself and go, okay, so if my relationship with my father is the number one thing in my life, which it is, how can I be wrong in this? What am I not seeing? Because I can't convince someone, I can't maneuver something, we can't control other people, right? As much as we want to, as much as our little hearts are like, they would just do this, I would feel so much more comfortable and loved and all my abandonment issues would be fine and da 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 da. What is it, right? It was, where can I be wrong in this? Where can I start to take responsibility? What would it feel like if I looked at this relationship dynamic through someone else's lenses? And from there, the relationship built and grew. And that's something that also, like a caveat to that, is it can really hurt though when people don't do that back to you, but don't lose that. Because sometimes when we're doing this work, it's like, I'm seeing the world through your lens, I'm setting these boundaries, I'm communicating effectively. What the fuck? And they don't do it back. Sometimes it'll then revert us back into old protective self mechanisms where we start to mirror their behaviors instead of model it. Don't let that happen. It's up to you to sit in that discomfort and recognize, like, oh, here's my old activated self. Here's my old protection mechanisms. Here's my old energy leaks coming through. But if I am truly embodying this highest self version of me in the feminine flow, in the trusting energy, how would I continue to respond? And it's not to say we have to keep people like that close, right? We get this kind of thing in our head where it's like, oh, well, if it's family, I have to tolerate this. If it's a sibling, I have to tolerate, especially, navigating addictions and violence and abuse. Like, there's things where it's like, oh, but if it's family, whatever. No. Or we do it in the context of like friendships where it's like, I've had it, we've been friends for so long, so I have to maintain it. It's like, no, you fucking don't. No, you don't. A thing that is beautiful is loving people from a distance. It doesn't have to be this, I need to teach you a lesson, and therefore, and that wounded mothering energy that I talk about so often. That's not it. but it's I love me so much. And I respect and honor you and the path that you're on and the lessons you're learning. And I just got to do me. I got to choose me. And from there, you can start to build relationship dynamics and conversation styles and building things around that, but we can't control people. And so when we're moving into talking to people, so there's the 5 places that we have boundary issues, where we set boundaries with, which is family, which is romantic, which is friendships, clients, technology. And so when we're looking at, and the most common one that I see that has the issues is family. Is that you? Wait, actually, I'm curious, which one is for you the biggest issue of boundaries? Technology, yeah. Technology boundaries. We'll talk about that one too. But that goes back to the conversation of yesterday, where I was talking about self and external, like self boundaries around technology. But a lot of people don't have boundaries with their tech, unless you're sexy man and he has too rigid of boundaries with his tech. Romantic, family. Yeah. And so family is the hardest one and the most common one that I see, because it's the one that we've known the longest. They've known every chapter of you. Whereas maybe your romantic partner only knows you in this chapter, the healed version of self, or the healing version of self. Or your friendships, maybe it's just this version of you in this city. Right? Clients, I mean, they come in certain wavelengths, unless you're like my lovely clients and they stay with me for a long time. But like, there's certain chapters, but your family, they've known you for so fucking long. I have boundaries as fams. I won't tell them certain things to them on purpose, because I know their reaction judgment. Exactly. And so like regulating and things of that nature. And so it's looking at it through that lens. And then there's this thing, right? Like you go back and you visit family, and let me know. Maybe I'm the only one in this, but I don't think I am. You go back and you visit family, and all of a sudden you're like responding like a fucking teenager again. And you're like, this isn't me. Why am I responding? Why am I so angry at you? Why am I bubbling and boiling? Like, what's happening? Or I'm stomping away. Like, what is this? And I remember these moments with my dad. And again, I was getting into this work. I think this was like 2019, 2018. And I realized, again, if I want to heal this relationship with my dad, how can I be wrong in this? Because I'm reacting in ways that are not me. And so it was really getting my delivery right on the comment. One, understanding that my reactions were from a triggered response, not that it had anything to do with him. Although sometimes, like in me, even as I say that, I'm like, some of them it is, but like your reactions, your responses to things, like that is entirely you. That's your choice. You can choose to respond calm. You can choose to respond as the rebel teenager or disassociate, whatever your thing was. I was the rebel teenager. And so looking at it through that lens, being like, shit, this man pisses me off so fucking much. Like so much. How can I stop taking that out on him? And how can I actually have a conversation with the present version self that he also is, because he is also not in his early 40s or late 40s anymore. And he's still not, can I see this man through this lens? And so we've had to have conversations around this. And, you know, sometimes I'll get this pushback where it's like, oh, it's good that you can have this conversation with your parents. That's a choice. That's a choice that I continually make, to sit down and have this conversation with my father is, hey, I'm witnessing this is how we're reacting to each other. And this is actually not the version of me that I want you to know, but you do bring out the teenager part in me. And when I first started having these conversations with him, it was this defense. Like he was like, he would fight me on it. He'd be like, you do this, you're sarcastic, you're stubborn. And I was like, that's fine. But every relationship is a two-way thing. And if we're in this in a team unit, can we have a conversation where it's not only me fixing the problem? Can we have a conversation around that? And it takes, when you're setting boundaries, consistent repetition, regulated repetition. With things like that, with family, where you're both just projecting old wounds onto each other, it takes consistency. And so we've had this conversation so many times because this relationship matters, right? Like there's a difference of sometimes having these conversations and it's not met. We love them and we leave them, whatever. But for me, I only have one family member left, right? Like my dad's all, I mean, I have my brother, whatever, but he lives in Tokyo, what have you. Like I have, my dad's all I have here in the States and my mom passed. That's it. So it means so much to me. So I'm not giving up on it. And every single time it's how can I communicate this more better? I take full fucking responsibility over the way that I speak, the way people react to me, the way people respond, like every single time, whether it's friendships, whether it's partners, whether it's my family, every single time I take responsibility for that. I no longer am like, that's their problem. It's like, how did I piss them off? How did I not communicate this effectively? Where did I slip up here? So that I can take full radical, because if I'm putting that all on someone else, where's the growth? Where's the change? Where's the personal responsibility? And that's not what I signed up for. I signed up for a life of taking radical ownership over every single fucking thing that happened, because you can't just celebrate, oh, our relationship healed. Oh, that was all because of me. That doesn't work. It's also, ooh, I didn't say the right thing. Ooh, little gecko just danced through the window. Ooh, I didn't say the right thing. Where am I wrong here? How do I want to do this better? What went right? What went wrong? What do I want to do differently? Every single fucking time. Even the bad things we have to take radical ownership over. And so I'd sit there and I'd keep having this conversation. We are in the midst of some big family things right now. I still do this with my dad. From a distance, with my own boundaries, making sure that I'm regulated, making sure that I'm calm, making sure that I can sit there. And even if my face is leaking, it's not from this wounded space of like, daddy, heal me, all these kind of things. It's from a space of, this matters to me. Where am I saying this wrong? Here's how I mean this. Here, what's a way that we can communicate so that we can fix this? And so we have like a word for each other. Literally, we just go tone. That's it. We don't snap. We just say tone. Because when he starts talking to me as if I'm a teenager, or if I start responding as a teenager, we just say the word tone. And we're working on it. And for you and whatever your family dynamic is, it's stepping into something over that where it's like, what's the conversation? What's the lead up? What do you want your relationship to be with your family? If you don't want, the Sunday family dinners and things like that, like that's fine. For me, that matters. But for the relationships that mean so much to you, where can you start to look at it through a lens of how are they perceiving me? What boundaries can I start to set around that? And how can I communicate this more effectively so that I am met at the capacity that I want to be met with? Because if my boundaries aren't being met and I'm growing more resentful and I have anxiety and I have depression and I'm feeling disconnected and I'm feeling disrespected, if I am the writing the manual on my boundaries and my blueprint of my life, that means I need to rewrite it. So can you start to go look at your life and the scenarios and things of that nature? Where is that block happening? Right? Going back to the homework that we had yesterday, that's why it's so important to start there. What is the block that you're so afraid of to have that conversation? Is it the conflict? Is the abandonment? Is it the way that a lot of the reason we don't set boundaries is because of the perception of other. How are they going to perceive me after I state this? How are they going to feel? What if they don't respond nicely? What if they don't listen? What if, all on the other person's perception? When in reality, a boundary is, I know me so much. Here's my identity. Here's my values. Here's my belief systems. This is my boundary. Now I can set them from a very grounded, communicative, conversational space. Is that making sense? Is that landing for you? And so when it comes to family, it's giving the compassion of like, we are all witnessing each other through the lens of all the lifetimes and the chapters that we've lived together. And is there a better way that I can say this from the present version self? Can I walk in? Sorry, there's something stuck in my tooth. You guys are getting the full version of my little ADD brain today. Where can I look at this through another lens, and how can I start to present this in a way that's going to have it be received? And so same thing goes for relationships, right? Why are relationship boundaries so hard? Because they're the most vulnerable. Like, we are in such a space of like, I want to be chosen. I don't want to disrupt the unit. I don't want conflict. Or maybe you're like past version me that I love conflict and I just wanted to stir the fucking thing if things got too quiet. But most of the times, if we're stuck in this good girl complex, good girls are seen but not heard. Good girls are agreeable. Good girls overextend themselves. Good girls don't really even talk about what they fucking want in the house or in the bedroom because don't want to disrupt the male ego. And then wondering why our relationships are so unfulfilled. And so when we're looking at things, there is a way to have these conversations saying like, yeah, what are some of the, when you think about boundaries in a relationship, what's that fear, or what's underneath that? Like, what are you afraid would happen with a partner when you set a boundary, or an example of a boundary you want to set that you're afraid to set? What is that? I can give you the example. I mean, I can dive deeper into the example that I was telling you about, sexy man and the phone stuff. He will mock me, he won't take me seriously, or he will reject me. Yeah. Those are big ones. Those are really big ones, and very real and alive, and not being with family, not feeling accepted. These are all so good, guys. And they're all real and alive, and it's going back to those questions that I asked you yesterday, right? Like, is this really true? Is this really true? Because if someone's not taking you seriously, is that your person? I know when I look back and I think back to like the guys that I would date that were narcissistic, or the abusive ones or whatever, like they would mock my boundaries. They would make me feel bad because I was attacking them. And that's a huge indicator light of who you're with and who to not be with. Because I can tell you now, anytime I've ever stated a boundary to friends, family, partners, clients, it is met with such love. But yet, because we're so afraid of these inner wounds, where it's like, where did that come from? When did that happen? Is that true? It's being able to stand in that, being like, I'm going to set this boundary, but I also have to be okay with that person not being able to accept that. And that's okay for them to love me and leave me as well, right? And stepping into that place, but being able to communicate from a space of, I love me so much, this is my needs, will only get matched with love and understanding. If it's from a space of, fuck you, this is that, of course you're going to be met with defense mechanisms, you know? But if it's from a space of like, hey, I know you're super busy, I'm busy too, but this relationship, like, I'm in a space in my life right now where prioritizing this relationship is really important to me. And one of my values is consistency. And so is there a way that, and just like leaving it there and then letting them come in with whatever thing they want to say and just being like, that's fantastic. But for me, my value is consistency. So where do you see that going in this dynamic, or whatever it is for you? There's a way of bringing these topics to conversation without it being accusatory, which then allows people to match us. Because if we're coming in and it's like you, that shuts people down. No one wants to be a part of that. Imagine times in your life that someone's done that to you. Like, i.e. the example I was just telling you about my dad. Whenever I would come and I'd set a boundary and he'd be like, you did this, you're stubborn, you're sarcastic, da 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 da. And I'm like, that's fine. And relationships take two. So what's the conversation you want to have about that? Right? Like it doesn't feel good when someone's doing that, but we can also look at it through that lens and be like, oh, I do that too. Like when we're coming to have conversations, it's like, hey, I really value this relationship. But when we're apart, there's not a consistency. And something I really value is consistency, and it makes me feel safe. So I just assumed we weren't on the same page. And then we started talking. I literally just had that with Sexy Man. I was like, hey, you know, I know you're busy. I'm busy too. I'm doing these things. Like right now in my life, I'm looking to prioritize a relationship and a long-term commitment and a long-term, that's my thing. And so I know we're in this space, but it just doesn't seem like we're on the same page. And like him to be able to enter that, like his words, even like the way that we've communicated over the last few weeks, because we are long distance, it's not easy building a new relationship over long distance, you know, but for him to be able like, because of the way that you communicate things, because it's vulnerable as opposed to accusatory, like I want to do these things. Like I want to work on them. I want to build this. I want to understand this. This light is very bright. I want to be able to do that. And so there's a way to sit there, right? So you can sandwich stuff. You can be like, hey, I really like when you do this. Can you do this? I really love you. Whatever. That's different kind of ways. Or if someone's not giving you the attention you want, and they like come back and you like how all my examples are around this. They come in and they go out of your life. And this could be a friendship too. I have friends that do this too, where it's like, it's not consistent. And it's like, hey, how was your weekend? And you haven't heard from them for an entire week. And you're like, my weekend was good. Kind of disappointed that I didn't hear from you. How was your weekend? So you're at least planting the seed and letting them know that like what you did pissed me off a little bit. And then it's sandwiched between it. So there's an example of that. Or when we're in, and I know Kia, when you're talking about anxious attachment, one way of communicating around that, because when we talk to anxious people, they are always thinking like they did something wrong or they want to fix it, and their brain goes chicken nugget. Speaking from experience, like someone comes and you're like, I'm wrong, I'm burning it all to the ground, fuck me, they're leaving me, like what, I did everything, like that's anxiety for you. And so a way of like presenting that is like, hey, you didn't do anything wrong, but I want to be able to come to you and talk to you about this stuff. Is this right now a good time to have a conversation? Always checking in with the other person of, is it a good time? Like I talk about this a lot. This is why when I said, when I messaged Sexy Man and it was like 6 a.m., not an ideal time. I didn't follow my own rule then, but I like to tell you guys the honest truth. Reality is making sure, is it a good time for that person to have a conversation, right? This is why when I have something that I do want to talk to Sexy Man about, or I want to talk to my sister about, or my best friend or whatever, it's always like, hey, how's your day? And like listening. And if they say it's been fucked, this happened at work, not a good time to talk about the relationship. Even though it might be eating you alive, even though you really want to set the boundary and have this conversation, even though it's like, it will not be met at the level of which you desire to be met with. And so it's like, is this a good time to have a conversation? Or like, nothing is wrong. I love you so, so much. I just want to be able to talk to you about something. And I want to be able to talk about you about this. Is this a good time? And then if they say, like, they are allowed to say no, and we do not get to take that personally. They can say no, now's not a good time. I'm in the middle of this. Can I? And then you can lead the conversation if they're not in this world yet. You can lead the conversation with like, great, when would be a good time? Tonight over dinner, let's have a glass of wine and let's discuss this. Fabulous, let's go. Like set the context of the container before you enter it. Set the energy of it, because if we're just planting the seed, and like same with like text messages, I know I just said I didn't do this with Sexy Man, but like when you're texting someone and you want to have a deep conversation, like if it's in like the wee hours of the morning or like the middle of the workday, like you're not going to be met with the full energy that you want when you're setting a boundary. Because when you're setting a boundary, it's not from a reactive, someone took my toy space. It's from a, I love you so much. I love us so much. And the way that I can feel safe in this container is if we follow X, Y, Z, and we set this context, and you meet me in this way, and this needs me to be met in that way. And also, is there anything you need? Is there anything you need? How can I support you better? if we can tell something is off in our relationship dynamics and something is going on, ask better questions about the other person instead of thinking it's only about self. Right? Looking at what do you like, because sometimes people, they're just like us. Humans are just like us. Our friends, our family, our people, they're also scared of rejection and abandonment, and that they're going to be made fun of and mocked and yelled at. And they're also that. So when you come to the conversation and the table and you're like, okay, I want to present this, but I also want to learn about you. What do you need? How can I be a better partner to you? How can I be a better friend? How can I be a better daughter? Like, what do you need from me? So that we can have a team. Oftentimes when we're building out our boundaries, we're building walls and we're forgetting there is another human we deeply care about on the other side of that wall. So when I'm looking at these things and I'm saying, oh, I'm trying to people please them and I'm trying to do that, can it just be two people having different conversations, speaking different languages? Because at the end of the day, sorry, this light is super bright. There we go. At the end of the day, boundaries is a foreign language to all of us. None of us know. None of us know. So when we're in conversation with another and we're wanting our needs to be met, don't forget to hold space for theirs as well. And if you don't have the capacity to hold the space for them yet, don't enter the context of that conversation because you are just building walls. It's just a pissing contest at that point, because when you're setting boundaries, it's from a grounded space. It's from a beautiful conversation. Oh, the puppies will go. It's from a space of, I love us. I love us and I want us to have a deep relationship. I want to feel comfortable with you so that I can express my needs, so I can step into my feminine energy, so I can feel safe and I can lead in this energy. What else do you need from me? What do you need? And in that creates this vortex of, oh, yeah, not all the time is this going to be comfortable and easy and whatever. But if you're looking at the longevity of the relationships that you have and what you want the outcome to be, can you have a little chicken nugget second of discomfort so that you can actually feel like your full self inside of this container, inside of the relationship? With family not feeling accepted, yes, good point. I don't think, how is this landing for you guys? I'm gonna read the chat box really quick. I don't think I could be with someone like that again. Way too toxic and invalidating. Dawn, I'm gonna save that. I'm gonna send it to you all the time. Check you in Voxer. What's up? I always try to communicate calmly and received a lot of placating. It's so confusing and frustrating. Yeah. So that's also a thing, right? And that's the learning, because in healthy relationships, it's more so looking at that being like, why would you tolerate it? Which I know you know that. That's why you're awesome and amazing and you're inside the D. But it's looking at these things of why would we accept that, right? And moving into the next relationship and the next containers of, and maybe it's not even doing that in a romantic relationship next and moving into that. Maybe it's just looking at where in our family, where in our friendships are we accepting behavior in that way? Because if someone is hearing your boundary and then not respecting it, they're not respecting you. And so it goes deeper as to why would we stay in that container, taking radical responsibility over all of that, right? And knowing next time, hopefully, and it may not happen the first time, right? Like when I was learning all these, like I said, like boundaries is a foreign language. It takes time for them to get into place, but you can start using it immediately. Whether it's with technology, whether it's with friends, whether it's family, whether it's with a lover, like you can start using it immediately, but the more comfortable and the more fluent you become in that language, it takes time. But it's looking at things like that, where it's like, okay, I accepted this type of behavior, and next time someone doesn't respect my boundary, what do I want to do with that? Right. And again, that's the difference, right? And so one of the things I did want to touch down is like when to set a boundary, when to not, and when to abandon ship and all that kind of stuff. Like it's looking at, for instance, that scenario, knowing they're not respecting the boundary and they're likely not going to, that would be an abandoned ship scenario. Or is it something like how it is with my dad, where it's like he has breached my boundary, but he didn't know. Like it just, the way I was communicating it wasn't landing for him yet. And so it was different ways. It's the repetition, it's looking at it. And then even still, if that was being just like, there's certain capacities where it's someone that you know is not a right fit for you, not a good partner, whatever, that deeper knowing of like, oh, they just don't understand, like, oh, that's just not good for me. Or it's a, like how I have to keep revisiting this with Sexy Man is it's not malicious at all. Nothing is going on. It's just not the way his brain works yet. And so what ways can I say this? And how many different capacities? And what is my limit on that as well? Because you do get to have a limit on how many times you repeat things. Because again, that's your choice. Am I going to follow this? Do I have the patience and the compassion that I pray for? Because at the end of the day, look at life through the lens of another person and know your limits and realize you have toxic traits too. So when you're in these scenarios and you're looking at things of like, okay, they didn't listen. Fabulous. What's a better feeling thought? What's a better way that I can say this to them so that it could land in their language? Because we are all, although maybe English is our first language, like we're all speaking different languages because we're all speaking from different trigger points in different spaces and different life scenarios. What are the different ways that I can use my current language to express my needs, my wants, and my desires so that this person can actually receive what I'm saying? Does that make sense? Anyways, yes, been really trying to embody a quote my mom loves. Be the thermostat, not the thermometer. I love that. Yeah. Set it up. Yes, I realize that now. I stayed way too long trying to make it work when he really wasn't. He was working on someone else. I don't want to laugh at that, but that was funny. But it's looking at who you are, what you desire, what you deserve, and letting your needs be directly communicated, knowing who's it really worth at the end of the day. If it hurts their feelings, we're probably saying it wrong. One, and if we are in our head and we know this is the kindest way that we can communicate this and they still get offended, we did our job and we can revisit it after, but at least now it's spoken. But be direct. And don't come from a space of, I don't, as I just do this to you, coming into a container being like, I don't like that you don't take out the trash. No, it's, hey, can you take out the trash? Two different things, same outcome, but two different energies, two different people that'll show up to the conversation, two ways this can be done. When we say we don't like something or we use a direct request, it shifts everything. And so making it clear, making sure that you're checking the energy, you're checking the thermostat of the environment and making sure that it's set up so that your energy can be matched in the way that you want it to be received and people are open to having that communication, and making sure that if you are in a dysregulated state, know your hormones. It'll take 6 to 36 hours to enter the container. And then when we're entering into family containers, giving yourself the patience, because even if you are triggered back into that traumatized, raging teenager, they're seeing it through that lens too, right? And so where can you grow into that? Where can you become more compassionate? And when dealing with, alcoholism or addiction or things of that nature, that's when you can still give that, like with me, with my mom, I gave her the compassion. I didn't want it in my life. Right. But I saw her on days when I knew I'd be okay. When I knew, okay, I can give you like one day a month where I let you pretend to be mom and do whatever. But like my heart wasn't reaching out for that motherly figure anymore. It was just allowing her to have that space. And I got my fix on mom, Mary Pat. She wasn't identified in my body as my mom anymore. She was Mary Pat. And so I stopped seeking this and stopped putting all these expectations on her that an addict can't do, and so I know some people in this are now navigating that and those kind of trigger things. It's like addiction isn't a choice, and trying to rationalize your way into that is never going to work, and it's only going to lead to disappointment to self. This is where we either detach with love, which is something they talk about in Al-Anon, where it's like, I love you and I leave you, or we start to build up these fortresses and these practices and these dynamics so that we can feel safe in the presence of them, and we stop putting so much expectations on them and we just kind of accept them as they are. If it's violent, if it's not nasty and it's toxic, then that's kind of where you do the detaching with love. But if it's, you know, addiction, it's fucked. And so can you do it from a distance and give yourself that kind of protective wall barrier where it's like, I'm not enabling your behavior, I'm not condoning any of it, I'll see you on my own time, and this is how I'm going to protect myself from this, but I'm still going to love you because you are a family member of mine. But what is a way that I can do this while also choosing me first? Does that make sense? I feel like I have so many things to say on this topic, but nice little appetizer here. We dive way deeper inside of sacred singlehood in this, so that's available for y'all. What questions? How are we doing? How the fuck? I literally, y'all, before sexy man dropped me off here, I was like so anxious. What am I like? I always get nervous. Like, am I gonna make it last an hour? And then I'm like, bitch, you can't stop talking. What was your part about technology? Thank you. The ones about technology is we have boundaries on technology, or we lack thereof. Like, have you ever looked at the amount of time that you spend on your phone or your computer or all the kind of things? Lack of boundaries. And that's where that version of lack of boundaries with self comes in, because it's not like your phone can set a boundary with you. I know they have apps to do that, but everyone just clicks ignore. Like, it's not an actual thing. So it's looking at what is your boundary with technology. How much are you mindlessly scrolling? Are you getting agitated by it? Are you getting agitated by the algorithm and how much the ads listen to you? And they do this kind of thing and they listen to you and then da, 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 and you're trying to reject it. And so you have these two porous boundaries where it's like, I'm not gonna be on my phone at night. And then all of a sudden you're like, your phone's right here, blue lights in your face and you're scrolling. Or are you like sexy man where like you just never touch your phone because you're afraid of technology? Like, what is your relationship to it? Is it too rigid? Is it too porous? Or is it kind of erratic all over the place where it's like these people do these, like, I do this. Mine's erratic for sure. I'm obsessed with my phone. I love it so much. My business is there, but I have a healthy relationship with it where it's like, I don't use it when I'm in the presence of other people, but when it's just me, like, I love it. I think it's my artwork. I get to create stuff on it. Like, it's my sexy little lover. And then all of a sudden I'll be irritated with it. And I do these like Sabbaths and I like shove it in a drawer for an entire day and I don't use it. And I'm like, I don't know how to get around without Google Maps. Like, it's this whole thing. So lately when I feel it in my body, kind of like an agitated feeling, I put it down, trying to listen to my body in relation to things. I have chills. I love you. You know, I'm so proud of you. It makes me so happy. I could cry. I noticed a definite addiction to it and trying to set more boundaries with it, especially when with others, although I also use it to avoid others. Yeah. So I like when it comes to my relationship with my phone and being around people, I really actively try not to use it. And I have the iPhone, so like I always keep it on do not disturb. Like, there's never a time in my life when it's not on do not disturb. So if you're one of my friends, that's why you always have to call me twice, because my phone does not ring. And I don't like notifications from it because it's been a trip trying to get a healthy relationship, because I used to be one of the people where like, I remember boyfriends getting so mad at me because I was just on it all the time, and they'd be like, are you working? And I'm like, yeah, for sure. Really, I was just scrolling to avoid intimacy and connection with others. And so really it's looking at like, am I avoiding others? Why do I want to avoid others? Where is my roadblock against intimacy? How is this happening? You know, and really looking at things in that way. And just playing with it. Like, it doesn't, again, setting boundaries like doesn't mean anything is right or wrong or people are whatever. There's no shame in it. There's no malice. And maybe that's like a neutralized way of thinking of boundaries. Like, look at your relationship with your phone. Can you come into, I love you, Kia. Thank you. But like, look at your relationship with your phone, and can you have as neutral as a mindset as that when it comes to your relationships? A little tidbit of advice. Like, when we take that emotional energy out of how we feel about our friends and our family, let's look at what we have going on with technology, and then can we apply that kind of same energetic field to our friends and our family? I hope that makes sense. So yeah, I love those questions. I love this. How is this for you? What's going on? I'm so excited. This was like the appetizer to sacred singlehood. we are up leveling it again, because the more that I do these things, the more I learn, and especially now stepping into, like, last time we ran this was when I was in my like the first time we ran this program was when I was going through my breakup. Second time was when I was in my like single girl summer phase, and it was fucking amazing. And this time is like the dating and the reclamation, and it's like this whole evolution. So each time, like, yes, we pull bits and bobs from the previous time that we ran it, but like this round, I have so many new codes, so many new downloads, especially with dating and learning from my breakup and learning from that relationship, and stepping into like the sexual liberation and, the family healing and the, moving away from this whole trauma thing, and just like really, like, no one talks about dating after heartbreak, and no one talks about dating after trauma, and really these like tools that aren't so womb focused. Like I found that a lot when I was looking at like dating stuff and like learning intimacy and wanting these things, like it was very much out there. It was, and it's not that I don't love that world. I just have to currently be living on an island, and that can vibe with me. But I like the way that I do it because it's a science-based approach. We still have the metabolism stuff integrated into it. Plus, it's like a hybrid. You get me as your coach for those 3 weeks to do that. And it really is about the quantum healing of your heart, your relationship, patterns, whether it is romantic, friendship, or familial, or money. Like it's all interconnected, because everything at the end of the day is a relationship to you. And so we walk through all of that, and I'm really bringing in the family side and the money side and all that kind of stuff into this conversation this round. So I'm fucking excited. I'm so excited. This one is going to be starting middle of November. And it goes for 3 weeks. We have 2 calls a week. There's replays available, payment plans available right now. For the next 24 hours, it'll be for the next 24 hours, it'll be $777. There's payment plans available. And then if you want to do a heart healing bundle, we also have that, which is unattached, fuck codependency, bounce back from your breakup, and then the live program that we're going to be running in November. Masterclass, not program, masterclass series, which will probably be around dating after trauma or something. But you can get that on its own. That's $555, or you can blend the two for $1,111, which is basically the price of one for 2, because the full cost of Sacred Singlehood is $1,111. So the price of 2 for 1. If you have any questions about that, I don't want to take this whole thing to be a little pitch thing, but y'all know where I'm at. I invite you to come hang out, join Dawn. I'll see you in Boxer, as I always do, because I love it. But yeah, let me know how this was for you, what comes up for you as you start to integrate this. Like I said, boundaries, it takes time. You get to revisit this. You'll hear practices. You get to put this stuff into play, and you get to see how it comes up and how it starts to activate in your body, and then it neutralizes in your body, and all these kind of different things. And watch as the world matches you. My biggest request is that you start to set your boundaries from a lens of your future self, your whole self. Because the way that we react and the way that we do things is often from the lens of our past, and it's very protective, and it's very mucked in that layer of stuff. So as you step into this new version, can you see it through a pair of fresh lens? Can you see it through the eyes of what would my healed self version of me be doing, and how would she present herself in this way, and what would her boundaries be? What's her values? What's her identity? Instead of I'm going to protect myself, can you step into it from a space of I'm going to open myself and be vulnerable? And that's what my boundaries are for. It's my bridge. It's not my moat. So I love you. If you know anyone that would benefit from this, share this with them. I love this so much. I love it so much. But yes, I will see you somewhere on the internet. Bye.